We already talked about a variety of lects, including dialect, sociolect, like ethnolect. Do you remember the definition of dialect? It's a variety of language that is regionally distinguished from other varieties. I mean, that's like the basic definition. So then you would ask, what is a sociolect? It's basically the same as social dialect. David Crystal defines sociolect as a term used by some linguists, sociolinguists, to refer to a linguistic variety or lect defined on social grounds. So basically, a sociolect correlates with factors such as social class, occupational group, etc. Another way of defining this would be sociolect is a variety defined based on some social feature or a set of social features such as social class, socioeconomic status, occupation, gender. So basically, there is another term that may be used interchangeably with sociolect, and that's the word register. So broadly speaking, the combination of lexico-grammatical choices appropriate to the social setting and context. So basically, it's a variety of language that is distinguished lexically and grammatically, and the lexical and grammatical choices correlate with social setting and context. Basically, within dialect, that is within the regional variety of a language, which is a dialect, you have subdivisions within the dialect, okay? So sociolect is one of those subdivisions. And I assume that another subdivision would be the idiolect. Any idiolect is part of a dialect. So you already speak a dialect, but within the dialect, you also have your own idiolect. In the same way that you can have your individual lect, you can have a variety that is specific to your social group, which will be your sociolect within the bigger context of your dialect. Here you can even see the word genderlect, like it means that the people who belong to the same gender group may have their own linguistic variety, which would be their sociolect. But the social group could be defined based on a variety of features. It could be your gender, it could be your age group, it could be your occupational group, all those things would be your sociolect, which is again part of the bigger variety, which is a dialect. For example, in Iraq, there is this Iraqi dialect, which is spoken all around Iraq. It's a dialect of Arabic. But within that dialect, the Christian Iraqis have their own sociolect. So in that context, you could say Iraqi Christian Arabic is a sociolect within the regional dialect that is Iraqi Arabic. A sociolect is defined based on the speech characteristics of a social group. Based on what I said about the relation between sociolect and dialect, you can imagine that you could have a dialect in a city, and within that city you could have different social groups which have their own varieties. So each of those social groups will have their own sociolect. So obviously, a sociolect is defined based on social background rather than geographical region. So geographical region is dialect, social background is sociolect. A sociolect or social dialect is defined by social categories such as socioeconomic status or socioeconomic class, membership in a speech community, gender, age group, ethnicity, caste, etc. For example, in India, you would be in the same region, but you would have different castes of people, and members of different castes would have their own sociolect. A sociolect is a variety of language spoken by a social group. So that social group would be a speech community that speaks the sociolect. A speech community is a community that is distinguished by their speech. They are not necessarily a physical community. They could be an online community that use the same language variety. So in that sense, sometimes a sociolect is distinguished by social activity. It's not necessarily part of something intrinsic to you, for example, your age group or gender. It could be different age groups or different genders. So in that sense, it's good to know that the same individual may be able to speak different sociolects. So you could go to the gym and speak, gym language, and then you would be a musician and you would speak your own music jargon. So the same individual may belong to different social groups, and depending on what social group the person is in, he may or she may speak that sociolect. So you might want to know more about English, like what is an example of a sociolect in English? For example, African American vernacular English is an example of a sociolect in English.
But this is the way I talk. I talk, I'm from the South. I'm from the deep South. And sometimes the way I talk runs into the way y'all talk.
In the African American vernacular English, they tend to drop the copular B. For example, instead of saying he's dead, you can say he dead. Or she beautiful, means she's beautiful. So they drop the B. So this is a grammatical feature of this sociolect.
And she found out I was a comedian. And she goes, "Oh, you're a comedian. Tell me, what do you know about Tommy Cooper?" He dead. She says, "I must be terribly British and correct your grammar. I think it's he died." I said, "At first he died. Now he dead."
He interacts with a British lady and she comments on his language. At first he died, now he dead. So in standard English, he should say, at first he died, now he is dead. I said a sociolect is distinct from other sociolects or other varieties of the language. So you would ask, how is it distinct? In what aspects? It can be in various aspects such as grammar, phonology, lexicon, etc. If you look at the work of Labov and Trudgill and others, you would find a lot of research on sociolects, various sociolects. A well-known research on sociolects is the work of Barbara Horvath, 1985, in which she investigates the sociolinguistic patterns of variation and change in Australian English.
My whole childhood, I don't know if anyone else here was like this, like my brother and I, yeah, maybe winning a gold medal at the Olympics, maybe. But being in the Guinness Book of Records, that was the ultimate goal in life.
So she looks at different sociolects or social dialects in Sydney, Australia in the early 1980s. That's an example of research on sociolects. But a more classic research on the sociolects of Australian English, it was a pioneering work by Mitchell and Delbridge in 1965, in which they identified 3 different sociolects of Australian English. Here, the research was focused on vowel realization. So, in their research, they found out that you can divide Australian English into 3 different sociolects.
Usually the butt of the joke ended up being me. If I have regrets, some hairy thunderer should come down from the sky and smack me down and say, "How much luck do you want in your life?"
Whatever, but we went through everything. I remember at one point we were trying to catch coins off our elbow. The record is like 194 or something.
Yeah. It's not a desire to be involved, but a feeling about some issues where I think Australia was going very wrong. And issues I feel strongly about.
Which they named the broad sociolect, the general sociolect, and the cultivated sociolect, if you only focus on the vowels, which this is an example of where sociolects are distinguished from each other based only on phonology. So basically in this video, I introduced the concept of sociolect, how it's distinguished from other varieties of language, what is the basis for defining or identifying a sociolect, and the different examples of sociolect in English, and I also refer to sociolects in other languages.